Talk with John here on KMMU, Main Street Media Utah.org. We look forward to having you with here for us. I look forward to having you with me for the next 2 hours. I'll be introducing my guest in just a moment. But first, let me give out the show prayer and then the show mantra. The prayer of my heart when it comes to doing this show, no need to bow your head, close your eyes. It's just the prayer of my heart. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra. Where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. All right, folks, let me introduce real quickly my guest, Austin Hepworth. And now I'm bringing him on. Austin Hepworth and I have known each other for a number of years. And in some ways, you could say I probably have known of him longer than I realize. Uh, Austin and I grew up just a couple streets apart. And in fact, Austin was good friends of my brother and just a great human being. So, here are some of the things about Austin Hepworth. Some of his accomplishment, experiences, and interests. He's a father of 8 beautiful children, and his wife and he currently home educates 6 of them. He graduated first in his class and summa cum laude from A.V. Maria's School of Law. How do you say that? I know I just butchered it, didn't I?
It's Ave.
Ave Maria School of Law. He currently practices law as a business, estate planning, constitutional attorney, and with Believe Legal. His first job out of law school was defending the freedom of speech at a firm in Indiana, where he was involved in a constitutional case. He also graduated as the outstanding scholar in business administration and summa cum laude from the University of Utah with a minor in Mandarin Chinese. You know what? I don't know that I don't know that I totally realized that. He also graduated from Cypress High School, the same high school that I started my high school career in, but didn't graduate from Cypress High School. I graduated from Hunter. But so do you speak Mandarin?
I still try to.
Still try to.
It's a little painful. It's
Where
rough.
did you first pick up Mandarin at?
I served a mission in Taiwan,
In
so I learned it
Taiwan.
there.
So I actually had a cousin that served in Taiwan and an uncle that served in Taiwan. So his son served many years after. In fact, my cousin served uh, also in the U.S. Air Force. And after meeting with the head general of the Air Force, they sat him down and said, "Okay, why aren't you wanting to be a pilot?" And he's like, "Have you seen my scores on color blindness? It's like as bad as you can get." And he's like, "Just about." And he's like, "Oh, I guess that's why you're not a pilot." Well, you speak Mandarin. Why aren't you a asset? Why aren't you gonna get into military intelligence and so forth? And he's like, because I've been accepted to law to med school. So, did you have a similar meeting with the University of Utah president?
Not with the president, no, but in law school, the CIA came out. They were recruiting. They love to recruit Catholics and Mormons, they said, and they especially love ones that speak second languages and things. And so they had come
Especially
out.
those that have been in the community, as it were.
Yeah. So I did talk to them, but uh, I felt ultimately if I were to do something like the CIA, I'd have to kind of trust the government. Um, and I just couldn't bring myself to do that. So
You were already there. Okay, so and then I want to give a little bit of background also on Austin Hepworth. Um, Austin Hepworth has been what those of us in the Patriot movement would consider just solid all the way from basically the beginning. in law school. So I spoke with his one of his instructors, professors. What would be the proper term? The guy from
Yeah, he was
Canada.
a professor.
Okay, and he said that this was his statement of Austin Hepworth, one of the best um, minds of law that he had ever instructed, and that he said, John, people that graduate from here and are the top in their class, all of them go and serve on the Supreme Court. For some reason, they realized how conservative you were, I guess, and said, no, we're not going to have Austin Hepworth. So he's been a man of principle since the very beginning of his foundation. I'm going to say and it goes probably all the way back to homeschooling. So we're not going to touch on homeschooling a ton, but for those of you that don't know, I wasn't homeschooled. That's pretty obvious. But I would say that I have a very, very high affinity for those that homeschool. Bottom line is, statistically speaking, they have the highest scores coming out of the ACT, SAT, and stuff like that. So, and not only that, they're just extremely well rounded. So, big fan of homeschooling and teaching your children at home. So I'm just going to put in a little mark. Also, Believe First Legal is part of Believe. Why don't you give us a quick rundown on what Believe is, Austin, and fill in um, any of the background that you'd like to.
Sure. So Believe is an organization I run, and its purpose is to, big surprise, help us believe, but particularly to help us believe that we can make a difference in this world. I went for quite a few years listening to people talk about, oh, we just need God, Jesus to come save us. Problems are too big, can't do anything. And at some point, there was just this thought I had that, wait, the only reason this is happening is because none of us are doing anything about it. And if we all changed our attitude, these things wouldn't happen. And it was just, I think it was a little bit of a wake up call from God, where God's saying, look, my job's not to save you from all your problems. You need to be doing your part. And as I thought about that, and I thought about my belief in God, that I truly believe we're the children of God and that we can become like Him. I thought we're not beings that are just helpless. We have the potential to work with God, partner with God, but also to pursue the divinity that's within us. And that means that we can be an influence and create change and do things. And so the goal of Believe is to help us lean into our identity and to the divine within us and say, we're not just stuck in the status quo. If we become active and we work, and especially if we start associating with others who are active and working, we can have quite a big difference and make an impact. And again, the point of Believe is to really try and push that in people's minds and hearts, get them to become involved and not just sit around. And that's not to say that we work in some legal areas, but also plenty of areas that aren't legal, because the law is not the solution to every problem. Some of those solutions have to come from the private sector. And we don't want to look to the law for every solution, because that's tyranny, essentially, if the law dictates everything. And so we try and strike a balance of going after areas where, if there are laws or things that need to be done, we try and do that when appropriate, but we really also try and push private solutions. And then Believe Legal, under that, is to specifically work with people. The goal is to work with believers, essentially people working to make an impact, do something. You can be an entrepreneur, even if you're just looking to make an impact in your family, do your estate plan, something. The goal is to say, those that are proactive, those that are planning, we want to work to make law a foundation so that your plans can transcend where you're at right now. They can continue on. And even with something as simple as an estate plan, you can leave a legacy that impacts your family for years to come if you are intentional about it. And it's really neat to see people who undertake to be intentional, to work to make a change and do something. And so that's really Believe in a nutshell. There's a lot of projects and different things we've been involved in over the years, but the goal is that we recognize we can make a difference and we can do something. We don't have to just sit and take whatever the world hands us.
So, how I got to know Austin, basically, I want to say it was like 3 or 4 years ago. Uh,
It's been almost 6 now.
6 years? Holy moly! Wow.
Almost. Yeah, we met in towards the first of 2019. So
Oh my gosh. So I actually had a friend of mine, former employer, said, "Hey, John, you got to come to these meetings." He goes, "I think they'd be right up your alley." And come to find out, Austin Hepworth, and I told my dad, I met this guy by the name of Austin Hepworth from Magna, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember Austin." And you know, and so Austin does bring in people. People come around him that have a desire for freedom and to make things happen within themselves. I do want to get back to something that you mentioned about the law and how it can be used, because that's going to get into, we've got 3 topics of conversation that we want to hit today. One, uh, Austin just recently ran for the Attorney General for the state of Utah. We also want to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act and also upcoming legislative session. So um, it's kind of funny how when he talked about believe, I'm like, how much of Austin's last 6 years and what he's done in the last year come from the belief system that he just said about believe and what he created. So some fine people. There's been people that I've been able to introduce to Austin that they're and when I keep on bumping around in these political the I'm going to say the patriot group, not patriot groups, but just the conservative good people that are trying to do things. It's interesting how often Austin's name comes up. I've made some introductions to a few. I've attempted to make introductions to him with some other people that already knew him, and we're already working with them. So Austin is one of the good ones out there, one of the really good ones. And the great thing is, he's under the age of 50, so he's got some great things that he's accomplished in life. But we've also got some years, and he's got some tread left on him to get some things done. So I'm grateful to you for coming on. So I want to go back to something you said, and I want to ask you to kind of hone in on a little bit more. What Where should the law be used? How should the law in a more constitutional society be used? Because one of the biggest concerns that many of my listeners have is that we 2 things happen. Some bill is happening, something they don't like is happening, and they go, well, we want to go after the and do lawsuits. And this comes from very much from, I'm going to say, the Democrat Party. They seem to fire off a lawsuit about everything, and to some extent the Republicans and the uniparty, you could say, uses lawfare themselves. Where is the proper place for role of law versus self-governance? And it just, one of the things that I'm worried about is we're going to be doing lawsuits over everything. I didn't feel that way when I was 20. I didn't hear other adults, so I ran around in really political groups, and that was not something, and political conversation was something I had from 16 on. I never heard adults talking about, oh man, lawfare. That was not something that I heard talked about 20, 25 years ago, like I do now.
yeah, and there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. But to your question of when's the law appropriate and when do we need self-governance, the way that I see it in my mind, which this doesn't provide all the answers yet, but it starts to provide the framework, is I view it similar to a seesaw, the old school playground toy that we don't have anymore because I guess they're not safe or something. I don't know. But
Litigiousness there.
yeah, someone's been sued, so we don't have
Yeah.
seesaws. But if you think about the seesaw, and it has a center point in the middle that balances, to me, that middle point is liberty. And the two ends of the seesaw are, there's anarchy at one end, and there's tyranny at the other end. And we need law. Law has a proper role to pull us out of anarchy as a society, to give us some level of workability and order. But if the law goes too far, then you are approaching tyranny where the law is making all decisions. And so any society that's a liberty-based society has to have a place where the law stops, and it says we just won't go there. And one of the deep concerns I have, to your point about the uniparty or Republican, Democrat alike, across the spectrum, whenever an issue comes up in society, we rarely talk anymore. It's getting to be quite rare where we say that's not the government's job. Instead, we say, pass a law to make it my way. And we're going to the law to say, put my solution in, and we want to push it through law, push it through law, push it through law. And right now, most bills, they're just getting to this place of a battle about whose side's going to win out, but the law is still being passed, which then leads to your point of crazy amount of lawsuits, because now everything's covered by law. We can sue over everything. And it's getting to the point where you just can't, it's not reasonable to even exist in a society where there's so many laws on the books. You don't know what to do. You're afraid. And some people think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But I don't think we truly appreciate how deep that fear goes in us. So for example, I was at Sam's Club today filling up with gas. You have to put in your Sam's Club card. And a guy pulls up next to me and he says, "Hey, dude, can I use your card? Because my Sam's Club card." He goes, "Because I just forgot mine." And my instant reaction is no, because if you run a bad card or a stolen credit card with that, then it's tied back to me. I don't know what happens. And that type of fear, if you look at giving to a homeless person or helping somebody, there's just all this intense fear where we start to go, "Oh, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's not let the neighbor kids jump on the tramp. Let's not do this. Let's not do that," because we don't know. And even I met with a legislative rep today to talk about a bill. And it's one that if it comes up, it will have some criminal element to it. And there was discussion about, well, the police already have so many laws. How are they going to know this? And someone suggested, well, what if you add it to mandatory training? And then some of the people there kind of laughed and go, they have so much in mandatory training that I can't add something else. And then they started talking about the police don't even know all the laws because there's so many laws to know, and it's not possible for a human to know all of them. And anyways, I say that because it's following this trend of conservative, liberal alike saying, let's turn to the law to solve our problem, instead of saying, yeah, that may be your problem, but we need to just say that's not the government's role. The government shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be involved. And we need to stand on that principle more than just saying, oh, well, we'll go provide a solution. We'll just make it our solution. But this also gets into the lawfare issue, because then what happens when there's so many laws in place, there's not the resources available to go after everyone or everything that breaks them, which then leaves it to a political decision about the one in power. And so we're starting to radically politicize our prosecutors' offices and our AG's offices. And we're saying only enforce the laws we like, pick and choose who we go after. And that's where a ton of the lawfare is coming up is, well, you can get sued. And, Granite School District, for example, sued a parent who was filing complaints about treatment their child was receiving. And they sued him for defamation. Just a crazy lawsuit.
Really?
But they were saying, hey, this employee, didn't do this or that or whatever. And they sued him for defamation, trying to get to deal with the issue. And that parent, fortunately, had the ability to push back, and they did. But most parents are just stuck going, wow, what do we do? Because we can't afford this. But it's this thing where once we pass too many laws and we go past that balance point, then there's a resource scarcity about how to allocate funds to enforce all the laws. It's just too big a thing to do. And so two things start to happen. We get more political, we get more lawfare. That's a clear indication that there's too many laws on the books, that the balance is tipped towards tyranny. And the other thing that happens is that sorry, I just totally lost the second thought. It'll come back to me in a minute.
So if we have two, okay, so kind of based on what you're saying, what would be a how do we get back to a balance point? Can we bring ourselves back to balance?
I believe so. I actually believe very strongly that we can.
How?
And
How do we
so
go about doing that?
there's two things, and we'll see if I can remember both at the end of it. There's two things I think that have to be done. One is we have to show people, openly teach the law. We have to teach the limits of the law. The law simply can't solve all problems. It's kind of like when people go, oh, there was another school shooting, so we need more laws. You go, wait a minute, it's already against the law. It's already against the law. More laws aren't going to stop an evil person's heart. And if you want to get to the place where you're talking about a society that, reads minds and stops things before they happen, then we're talking about a very different society than we currently live in, and I think one that all of us would be very unhappy in. So there's this aspect that the law has to be taught, the limits of the law have to be taught, the purpose of the law has to be taught, and the consequences of the law have to be taught. Because another thing that happens is we don't teach the real impact the law has on society. But if you start to look at it from the lens of, okay, why is something happening? And then you look at certain laws associated with it. For example, if you just look at the declining birth rate in America, we have way fewer kids. I don't know of anyone that's going to say that's the law's fault or that the law contributed to that. But if you look at parents today, they're incredibly stressed, they're incredibly anxious. Why are the parents of today way more stressed and anxious than the parents of the 50s and 60s? Well, start to think about the laws in place. If your child falls and gets hurt, hits their eye or something like that, and you take them to a doctor or they go to school, you're instantly questioned about whether you're a child abuser or not, because we have mandatory child abuse reporting
Right.
laws. And
Can I pause you there?
Yep.
So people go mandatory child abuse laws. I want to give a scenario that just happened with one of my children. Um, uh, I've got a son that's a football player, and he was with his coach and teammates, and one of his fellow teammates made a smart aleck comment and his uh, about someone touching somebody, and that's like basically saying sexual harassment and it's a joke. And the coach got really upset, and he goes, "Do you realize your statement that you just made is going to cost me an hour of paperwork today that I have to fill out?"
Yep.
That is a actual scenario that just happened, that my son came home and shared with us. I was like, wow.
Yep. And these mandatory reporters, they have to report everything because we're trying to stop all child abuse is the goal. And so they have to report everything. And so now parents get questioned. You take your kid to the doctor, they have a bruise on them, they have something, you're instantly questioned. Your child has mental health issues, you're questioned. Are you an abuser? Are your parents hitting you? All these different things. And so what happens is parents know this. They know that their kids know that there's power in just saying, sure, mom hit me, whatever, I don't like her today, whatever. And it makes it so there's incredible anxiety that runs through parenting. They hover over their kids, they're helicopter parents. They don't let them do the normal things that kids do when they grow up because they might break a bone or whatever. And there's certainly societal factors that contribute to that as well. I'm not pretending the law is the only thing, but I do believe strongly the law is a significant part of it. And if you want to improve the mental state of parents, you need to give them a little bit more room. And this is something even with teachers, we're talking about it with teachers, with legislative reps, that the teachers are terrified to do any discipline, anything. They're afraid of getting sued. There's no clear delineation of what they can or can't do. And the kids are just walking all over the teachers in public school in many classrooms. It's not to say every single situation is horrible, but you can see how it's degrading because of the fear of a lawsuit, the fear of the law coming in, these different things. And then who is it that gets sued? Well, if you happen to have crossed, the wrong group, crossed the ACLU or someone else, then maybe they come after you. And people don't know. They don't know if they're in the radars. They don't know if they're not. That creates fear. That creates uncertainty. And that, going back to the original 2 points we're talking about, it's one of the indicators that we're moving towards tyranny, is the fear is increasing in society, and even fear and distrust of each other. The more the laws come down, the more the balance tips towards tyranny, the more we distrust each other, because everyone around us becomes a potential reporter of us for something that's just a normal life situation. And in communities breaking down, people get together less and less. You look at during COVID, people were afraid that someone would report them. And those fears have lingered. We haven't recovered as a society from that. But this
How
is to
mu-
say,
why would you say so? How long do you think it will be before we can recover, and why do you say you don't think that we've recovered yet?
so one reason is we have some groups getting together again. So, for example, people go to sporting events, some of the things that they love. But the smaller events that drew people in the groups of 20, 30, 40 neighborhoods, different things, many of those have gone down. Attendance at church events has gone down. And I know there's a thing about people being less religious, but church was a significant part of community. And there's far fewer community style events than there used to be. And one big thing, one way to really test the social awkwardness still is you go knock on someone's door and just go to introduce yourself to a neighbor. There's still a deep societal anxiety or uncomfortableness with that door knocking. Since COVID, even the door salesmen that come, they knock on the door and then they go stand at the bottom of the steps. They have this intense space that they create. They don't stand right at the door anymore. They're way back there. They're down the steps, trying to help people feel safe or whatever. And you can see this, that there's still this societal tension because there's still people that have issues. It's one of the reasons why there's so much tension still with the work at home debate, coming to the office debate. There's still people who have a very strong anxiety now about getting together with other people. There's still a fear of it that's
I,
sitting there.
I'm amazed when I go around how often I see people wearing masks that seem to be healthy individuals.
There's still people that wear masks for sure, and that's still and it's, again, in some ways my heart goes out to people who have, if it's a deep anxiety or something that's making them afraid of
Absolutely.
things.
Right. I how
But
much do you
it's,
put on them individually versus what the bill of goods that they've been sold?
yep. Yeah, because I even had a daughter during COVID that, with the pressure from the outside world during COVID about, oh, you've got to stay home if you're sick, oh, someone might die, all these things. The message that she picked up, and she wasn't even in public school, but the message still that got through to her during this time was that if you get someone sick, you're a murderer. And she developed anxiety to even breathe around someone. If someone came by her, she would try and hold her breath. And she was just so
Wow.
anxious. And I look at that and I go, okay, there's concerns. We need to address these types of things. I know that's not how everyone interpreted it and things. But to your point, when the law comes down and says, well, you can't go out because people are dying, the law is starting to infer that. And then you see things, South Korea, they prosecuted a pastor that brought people together and accused him of manslaughter because someone in the congregation died. And then here in Utah, we had the group that organized an event, COVID event, and tens of thousands of people came. They were sick of being home. They got prosecuted for organizing that event. And the law is certainly sending a message that you've done something criminal at this point. And that criminal aspect of it is tied to the fact that people die. And so whether the law directly says it or not, to your point, we are actively communicating these things, and then people are much more afraid. And to the point where the schools even had to start telling parents, if your kids are sick, you need to send them still, if they can still function, because everyone's staying home for every little sniffle, and society can't work this way. But that's what was internalized. That was what was taught. That was enforced through law. And it's there now as this thing that we're working to try and peel back from. But I think most people don't believe that we're in a legal system that will respect liberty next time around. They're just afraid that maybe I have the next COVID or whatever it is that kicks this, starts this whole thing.
So that's
And
a concern of some of my guests. Not just, excuse me, many of my listeners. Is it a reasonable concern?
reasonable concern that they have the next COVID or that there will be another.
That they will do something. Is it I think it's a reasonable concern. Eventually, we've had these public health cries, I would say every 2 to 5 years.
Yep.
It happens all the time. Swine flu, bird flu, RSV, numerous different things. And I've known people that have gotten very sick from some of these different things. But is it reasonable for people to be concerned that we're going to have it go as deep as it was this last time?
Yes. It's very reasonable because we haven't solved, there's two pieces that we haven't solved. We haven't solved the legal side. The government still has the power to do these things. And two, we haven't solved the societal side of the proper role of government. And this goes to when you asked, how do we get back to a state of balance? We have to teach about the law and its proper role and function and why there is this balance and what it does for us. But two, we have to actually work with people and teach openly and share the morality underlying liberty, because one of the reasons liberty is under attack, and we'll see this more and more, is because as a world we've become convinced that we can stop all harm, and we're trying to use the law to stop all harm. And so with something like COVID, we say, oh, we can keep people alive if we just keep them home. And the intentions behind our
Is that something
actions,
that should be taught?
it should openly be taught that the law can't solve all harms, and that in a liberty-based system, there are risks to it. We have to be very honest that there are risks in a liberty-based system, meaning there's not a policeman standing at my door every moment. And so it's up to me to figure out how I want to defend my home or my family if there's an issue. And in this balance of liberty, and that we talk about this area where the people have to make decisions, you have to be responsible for yourself. And if you're not, it may be really sad, but you weren't responsible. It's similar to if you lose a job. Right now, we turn to the government. We say, oh, the government should give us unemployment compensation and insurance and all these different things. But we all know, every one of us knows we can lose a job. So why don't we take the responsibility to prepare for that? Why do we ask the government to step in and make sure that we're protected? Every time we ask the government to step in and protect us from something that we could have done ourselves, we could have saved, we could have, been building our skill set, different things, it pushes us towards tyranny. But we have to teach people
There,
the why of liberty.
we could even there's the possibility that if we didn't have the government trying to bail us out, that might be an insurance policy you might be able to buy. It's some type of gap coverage, right? That would be maybe not I don't know if the proper term is buy, but you could get I'm sure there would be insurance policies for some of these gaps for unemployment.
Well, there's things like, you can turn to the private market, but even just looking at your own individual self of what happened to the good old tradition that you actually saved money and you had 6 months of savings so that you could go between job loss. People used to do that. And not everyone did. And there were people who suffered because of it, who lost their house because of it. But we're in such a rich world right now that we look around and go, oh, we've all got money. We should be nice and make sure no one, goes without a job or a home. And we give them these things. But in reality, when we mandate that companies provide workers' compensation insurance, again, one of the things we don't mention is that, well, that's straight out of your pocket now. You're now paying for someone else's decision to not be responsible. And it's money your employer could have given to you, but they can't right now because it's mandated by law that it goes to something else. And things like workers' compensation, it's interesting. This is a fascinating one to me. We mandate that employers pay a pretty high premium for workers' compensation insurance in case an employee is injured on the job, which I'm not necessarily opposed to an employer making sure that an employee is taken care of that's injured while at work. I think there's some balance to it, but it's crazy to me that we'll mandate that they pay intense coverage for an on-the-job accident. But if your employer also gives you health insurance that could just cover anything, they still have to pay for the workers' compensation insurance. And I say, why don't we just say that your workers' compensation insurance coverage requirement is satisfied if you provide your employees with health care? And they could literally just take that money and give their employees normal health care, normal health insurance. Because then just tell health insurance, if you're covering an employer, you'll have some employee accidents that you cover as part of that. But again, these are interesting things to me in that we often just say, oh, we need to fix accidents here, and now America's pushing to say, whoa, health insurance is so unaffordable. Let's mandate that the government provide it or private companies provide it, whatever. I go, the law is not the solution. The law doesn't ever make things cheaper. The law doesn't make it better. And I think that one of the things we're not teaching in America at all, or very little, I shouldn't say at all, but very little, we talk about liberty, but we're not actively teaching why a system of liberty that has some risk to it, where someone could get hurt, or they could suffer as a result of their bad choices, why that's a better system than the social safety system or the socialist type system that says we'll just protect you from all the harms that come. And I get deeply concerned when every event and venue has to go to intense security to screen for all weapons and things, because it's the law is putting the responsibility on them to keep everybody else safe. And the law continues to transfer that responsibility to more and more people. It's your responsibility to keep things safe. To the point where you talk about lawsuits, the policy manual or the manual for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the handbook, I guess you could say the handbook, that's what they call it, now says that if you work with children, if you get a calling to work with children, the way that you should look to protect yourself is you should go purchase insurance to cover any claims that may come up.
Oh, wow.
And I look at that and I go, that's a really sad state that we're in, that I can't even volunteer and work with kids without the organization saying, our laws have become such that there's risk here and you need to take insurance for the claims that will come or that may come. And I go, that to me is an indication of where we're at as a society right now. But again, we don't talk about, with all these things to say, well, keep the kids safe. We don't talk about the fact that, well, why don't I just teach my kids to yell and hit someone? Teach them not to be alone with somebody.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't protect children, but we're putting the responsibility on someone else, taking it away from me. And tyranny is a state that says, openly, they said, "Oh, we'll take all the responsibility. You don't have to do anything. We'll keep you safe. We'll do all these things." And there's no happiness when we have no responsibility. We just blame, blame, blame. That's where we sue like crazy because it's always somebody else's fault. And I just go, America, we need to really embrace this notion that responsibility, personal responsibility, is a blessing. We need to teach why it's a good thing and actively model it to people to say, yep, I take responsibility for my life. I take responsibility for my health. I don't need the government to step in and save me because this is the end result of what happens. This is what happens to me. The only way we progress and are happy is by taking responsibility. That's why the state of liberty, when to me the Constitution struck that balance and America was there for a very long time, that's why there was so much progress. That's why people wanted to come
Right.
here. It was the happiest nation in the world. Right now, we're one of the most depressed nations in the world. We're so bad on depression and happiness that you go, we're one of the richest. What's happening? But we're shifting our responsibility. We will never be happy when we shift personal responsibility to someone else. It does not bring happiness.
So we could continue down this path for quite some time, but I'd like to get us to the three reasons why I invited you on today. And I think we've touched on every single one of these points, kind of ties into the three different topics. So let's first start with, and real quickly, folks, the three things that I'm going to try and focus on that we will talk about here going forward is um, Austin ran for Attorney General. Why did he do it? What was he hoping to accomplish, and what did he learn? The second thing is the Corporate Transparency Act. We'll see if we can get to that, and then the legislative session coming up. Any things that he wants to point out. So let's start with you ran for AG. I happen to know a number of people that voted for you. I wish more people would have voted for you. What did you learn? And what did you accomplish? And how close did you get to accomplishing your goals for running for AG for the state of Utah, Attorney General for the state of Utah?
Yeah. So I'd say that one of the reasons I ran was because I actually believe very strongly that. So I ran independent outside the parties, and in Utah, historically and true through this election, independents haven't won. But I actually feel very strongly that the office of AG and the office of auditor should be independent of the parties, and that we shouldn't have Republicans policing Republicans or Republicans auditing Republicans because it's a massive conflict of interest. And if we want good, healthy government, good, healthy checks and balances, we need to do something different. And we as a people currently have the opportunity to do something different. We vote for these people. We don't have to vote in conflicts of interest. And we get upset at the government for things. But I just go back to saying, well, to what extent is it our fault? What are we doing to contribute to this problem? And I believe we contribute to the problem by the way we vote. I'm not saying it's the sole source of the problem, but we contribute to it. And so I wanted to teach people the power of their vote and really push a message to say we can do something different. And so on that front, I guess one other thing to share with that is I believe very strongly that every true principle or every good thing has a spirit behind it. It's just one way I phrase it. I'm not saying it's like an actual, spiritual being or something, but there's a spirit there that as truth is shared, it goes into people's hearts and minds, and that truth collectively grows, that spirit of it grows. And I believe that the spirits we feed are the ones that eventually take control of society. I believe that evil knows this very well, and they feed certain spirits through media, through other messages and things to get us to start to accept things. And every time it's fed, every time we consume it, it grows in its strength. And so the way I believe that we start countering that is we start doing other things. We put time and energy into it, money, whatever, and that grows a spirit. And so my goal was to start growing a spirit where we as a people started voting for healthy checks and balances, things that would help to clean up government. So to that end, I think it was very successful in that a lot of people heard the message. It resonated with people. They started thinking differently, looking at things differently. And I think there was another aspect to it too, where people started realizing there is some hope, because a common thing that people feel is that they have no control over what's taking place. But they did start to realize, wait a minute, if we talk and we share and we do things, this can literally spread. And if you get an independent AG in, some of these government officials that are very comfortable breaking the laws or rules because no one enforces it against them, they now have to take a step back and say, am I going to do that or not? And that threat of enforcement, we as a people experience
Okay,
it.
so I'm going to have, I could just hear someone out in the audience chirping and saying, our elected officials aren't breaking rules, breaking laws. And what's the situation where that's happened recently?
Yeah,
What's
so
the evidence?
it's a great question. There are quite a few instances of school boards, local school boards, and city councils that close meetings to the public, for example. So these are meetings that by law, under Utah law, have to be open, which means the public's invited, the public can be there, the public can comment, and the public's supposed to have input before legislative decisions are made. And these bodies get tired of the public being there. They get tired of the comments and pushback. And it's not uncommon to have them decide to just close a meeting. It's a felony under Utah law to close a meeting to the public that's supposed to be open. And Alpine School Board did this. And there was a group of parents that had shown up. They wanted to have a say in some new rules that they were going to roll out. And Alpine School Board decided, well, we don't want to listen to them. They literally lock the doors right before these parents come in, and then they go ahead and take their vote. And the parents send a complaint up to the AG's office. The AG actually responded at the time, which was more rare. The AG usually doesn't. But and the AG said, yeah, we looked at it. They did break the law, but we talked to them about it, and they told us they won't do it again, so we're not going to do anything about it. And that type of lax enforcement makes them quite cavalier, to the point where you have people like Phil Lyman goes to a public park in St. George and is told you can't be here or else we'll arrest you. And he says, why? And they said, because this is an event just for true, GOP candidates. And he's a write-in by this time. And he says, well, this is a public park. Anyone else can walk in here. I want to walk in too. And they said, no, you're not allowed to be here.
Wow.
And there were 6 police officers, and they drew a line and said, if you cross this, we'll arrest you. And these are things that our government officials become more and more willing to do. There was the situation of the man that wore the sticker at a legislative hearing a couple years ago, and he was just straight up arrested because the speaker in the committee at the government level just got frustrated by the sticker. It wasn't even anything crazy. It was like, yes on this or something. I don't remember exactly what it said. But he just ordered the police to arrest the guy and take him out of the meeting. And they just go up and arrest him and drag him out of the meeting. And then you have situations like Governor Cox and Henderson, where it's not quite a violation because the law's a little gray. But when they refuse to release signatures about their own signature gathering process, they released them about other people that use the same company, and there were serious issues found. And then as soon as someone says, oh, well, I want to see yours too, they say no. And not just to the public, they say no to the legislators who requested it. They say no to others who had a right under Utah law to see them. And the governor says no. And then our governor also, people submitted a public records request for his cabinet's conflict of interest statements. The only reason you file those is for the public. And he just said, no, I'm not going to give them to you. And
Wow.
And then the only thing that people have left is they can complain and say, hey, prosecutor, will you do something about this? And they all go, it's the governor. I'm not going to do anything. And then you go to try and appeal it. And the game that was played there was the Senate was refusing to confirm appointments to the Hearing Records Committee. So if you submit a request to the government for public records that you should get and you get denied, you go in front of this committee that then orders the government to produce them. But the committee has people who are subject to confirmation by the Senate, people's terms that expired. And when all these record requests are coming up, people wanting to inspect things, the Senate refused to confirm any appointments. And suddenly the committee falls below a quorum. And so now there's not even a way to get the committee to hear your appeal of a government denying access to records that you have a lawful right to access.
Wow.
And these are the games that are played consistently. And again, it's not saying that all government officials are evil. I'm not pretending that. I'm not pretending like, our whole system's falling apart. But the more this goes on, the more cavalier people become because no one does anything. And that's a problem. And then we get corruption, we get conflicts of interest, we get backroom deals. There's no oversight. No one's checking into it. Because who wants to prosecute a fellow Republican? The party doesn't want that. And these are issues.
I would say it's not just who wants to go after a fellow Republican. You become a pariah within the Republican Party if you were to do something like that, and many people will go after you. I have had people share with me. A number of listeners have shared with me, and people that aren't listeners have shared with me. Such and such Republican senator or congressman has told them, or told even another senator or congressman, if you don't support me and my bill, I will do everything that I can to stop every one of your bills from going forward.
Yeah, and that's what I call the good old boys network. It's a very strong power play that they utilize.
And if that's happening just within the legislature, I'm assuming that's happening within other offices within the government.
Yeah, it's the nature of it's one of the beasts that we've allowed to take control of politics. One of the spirits we fed extensively. You scratch my back if I scratch yours, and if you don't, we will turn on you. No matter how good your bill is, we can always find some fault with it. We can always find some excuse, and it's pretty open. It's not, you go up there to the legislature and there's one rep, and she was just super open. She said, you guys aren't playing the game correctly. She says, you're not going to get a thing done unless you step up and support this, because if you refuse to support something, if you refuse to support what we care about, no one's going to support what you care about. And she said, you just got to play the game. And I said, yeah, no, thanks. Not interested. I have principles. And again, I'm not saying that everyone doesn't, but there are legislative reps who have principles who are on the fringes of the system. They're not.
That was my whole concern with Phil Lyman running for governor, is that we would lose probably the best state legislature in both houses.
Yeah, Phil did a lot of good things, and he was one that, just again, in my experience, you talk to someone about a bill and you say, oh, what if we have Phil sponsor this? They'll go, it won't pass. No matter how good it is, it won't pass if Phil sponsors it. That's just what the messaging was in the last couple of years. And it's just to this point that, well, it won't pass because he's not playing the game up there. He has principles. And that was something that came across very loud and strong from other representatives. But to your point, yes, it's really neat to see people with principles. The system does everything it can to
crush those,
crush that,
or to silence them, to marginalize them, or crush them.
or just make it so you're there. It's kind of like you look at a Ron Paul, and it's neat. I'm not saying I'm not inferring he's doing anything wrong. It's just he's not this heavy hitter in the federal government. He often is the lone vote no on things. He's just no, that's not proper. Um, and I imagine it's a pretty lonely life for him because he's probably not included in a lot of the meetings and discussions on things. But he still makes a statement. He still makes a stand, and there's real value to that. But yeah, there's not. He's not heralded as this guy full of solutions with all these laws that have been passed. Again, because the system's not there, and the solutions he would propose, they probably wouldn't vote on anyways, even if it was, even if it wasn't a system thing, they still don't love it because it's less government and things. But
So, what did you learn that you want my audience to take from this conversation?
yeah, I think the thing for me is
As far as running for AG, that is.
yeah. So running for AG, the piece that really I'd say my eyes were really open to, and that I really wish we could all internalize, is that liberty only exists if we take responsibility for our government and our situation. Meaning we don't have to blame ourselves that some legislator voted for something or passed some bill, but we need to be actively asking ourselves, have I done what I'm supposed to do? And the thing that really brought it to my attention was, as an independent, you run, the only way to get on the ballot is to get 1,000 signatures, and you go out and get the signatures, and then you get listed on the general ballot. So no one sees you until the last ballot comes out, because they don't see you in the primaries because you're not
Right.
subject to a primary and things. But it was the concerning thing to me was once I qualified for the ballot, which was in February of this year, people instantly started asking me as I'm out talking to them and meeting with them and things. The question was almost unanimously the same: how are you going to win? And that question was so interesting to me because I know that a politician or a candidate, if you run, you have an obligation and a duty to put your stuff out, teach people, share with people. I get that. But I really started thinking about that question, and I was going, wait, why are you asking how am I going to win? Because I'm on the ballot. My name will be there as a choice, where everyone in Utah then has a moral choice to say, do I just check the R? Do I actually research the candidates on the ballot? And if I've put up a website and put information on it, then in some ways, I felt, again, my job isn't to go out and be the best salesman necessarily. My job's to put out things I believe in, things I stand for. And if that resonates with Utahns, let them vote for it. But I think deeper within the question was this recurring theme of, well, Austin, we're looking to you. What are you going to do? And that was where I started realizing how far off we've gone in politics from the personal responsibility side. We look to our elected leaders to save us. They're only half of the picture, or at least in a proper state of liberty. They should only be half the picture of what they're going to do and things, but we have to be the other half on this balance. And the other half, we do so little of it. We do so little vetting the candidates ourselves. So many people go, oh, well, my friend told me who to vote for. I trust them. That right there is an abdication of personal responsibility. And it was fascinating to me to look at the numbers. So there was about 1.8 million registered voters in Utah by the time the election took place. I got about 50,000 votes, I think, out of that. So it was a little over 3% of the ones that voted. And but from the website visits, which were tracked, Google and the website company tracks all the people that come, there were 18,000 people, unique visitors, that came through the course of the entire year to that website.
How many?
And 18,000 out of 1.8 million. And so we're looking at something that was about 1% of Utahns went to the original source. Now, I don't want you to take this to mean that no one did any research, because there were people, for example, 50,000 voted for me, 18,000 came to the website. People got information from other sources. We passed out flyers. We passed out door hangers. We had stuff on Facebook, which I don't see those numbers. Facebook doesn't show me. I had stuff on Ballotpedia. People go to Ballotpedia. So I'm not saying that only 1% of Utah did the research. But it was to look at and say, but out of that 1% went to the original source for direct information. And that was where I was really interested to say, as a people, we have to learn to stop taking the news's word for it, to stop taking someone else's word for it, and literally just type in Austin Hepworth, Attorney General. It was the top result. You didn't have to search for it. It was number one result if you typed in Austin Hepworth or Austin Hepworth, Attorney General. And I often think about that with case law, Supreme Court cases. Why don't we just look it up and read it? Why don't we go to the original source? But we're so tied into letting someone else tell us what it means that we won't go look at it ourselves. We won't go see the original source ourselves.
Well, one of the things when I've looked at the Supreme Court's opinions, sometimes I can't make heads or tails of it.
Sure, sometimes, but sometimes you can. And the Supreme Court, even on their official thing, they put in what they call a syllabus, which is basically an outline of what takes place. And they even give kind of a summary of it at the beginning. And but even then I say, okay, let's say that you went to the original source and you said, well, I don't understand what this means. Well, then reach out and ask a specific question about what something means. Or again, Google it, because that's a big thing where I remember this one bill that came up caused a lot of heartburn among conservative groups. I personally supported the bill, but it had some language in it that you had to go to case law to understand why it was there and what it was doing. So I get why it appeared concerning if you didn't understand the case law. And I had people that called me and asked me, which was a good thing. But I didn't meet a single person that just simply Googled the term, because there's actually a lot of information that would tell you exactly what it meant and why, including from courts themselves that can describe that pretty accurately. And so maybe the case you're reading didn't make sense, but again, I look at it and I go, why are we asking the government to solve our misinformation issues, or to tell the government that, even another example is a lot of people want to say, Google, you can't censor content. And I look at that and I say, but we can simply use another search engine. There's literally hundreds of search engines, and it takes me 5 seconds to download a new search engine and use it, or just to go visit their website and use it from there without even downloading it. And they're more than happy to give me information. There's ones that are open about their bias. There's one Christian one that only returns, or I shouldn't say only, but its first priority returns are Christian-based content. And so it says, if you only want to see Christian content, come to our search engine and we'll feed that to you. And there's all these groups out there. And again, on the personal responsibility side, I say, so why are we asking the government to solve the Google issue and censorship? And people's response to that is, well, even if I'm smart enough, it's because of all the other people that aren't. And I go, wait, we're going down a really, really scary path, because now you believe they're misinformed, but they believe you're misinformed. And they're asking the government to solve your misinformation because you believe something they don't.
Let me ask you your opinion on so something that President Trump is talking about doing is implementing one of his initiatives, I guess you could say, is to cause term limits, or for the congressmen and the senators to be term limited. What are your thoughts with what you've just said? What are your thoughts on term limits?
Yeah, my thoughts on term limits are that, again, we're asking the government to solve our own problem, which is we chose these people. And this assumes, so this conversation, so some people listening will probably disagree, because they'll say, well, we don't trust the election results and things. But assuming that elections mostly function the way they should, we choose people. And
Well, let me put it this way: if the election results are, if if you don't believe in the election results, does whether you have um, term limits or not, is that going to change the dynamic in any way, shape, or form? And I would say, if our if the voting system is that jacked up, they're just going to manipulate it however they want to.
yeah, and it may not be the same people, but this is a point that I heard someone make. He said, yeah, he said term limits are a very liberal thing because he said liberals are a dime a dozen. You can find one to replace another one and they'll just vote. He said, but a true good conservative, like a Phil Lyman candidate or something in the Congress, or a Ron Paul, he said Ron Paul, he goes, if there's a term limit on Ron Paul, he goes, you're never going to replace the guy. And he says the conservative movement's the one that's radically hurt by term limits because of how hard it is to find a good, principled person to be there. But in addition, one other factor that I don't think we think about with term limits, which is something that it's interesting because Trump's addressing this to an extent, or trying to, with this second term, is the government's become so expansive that there's a deep bureaucracy underlying it. And the AG, for example, the AG comes into an office and guess what? Nothing changes for most of the people in the office. It's just business as usual. Oh, we have a new AG up there. But the office itself is run by unelected officials who have a job, and they just keep it going. Same with all these government offices. It's not like the whole system falls apart if there's someone that doesn't know how to manage that's elected, because most people that are elected don't know how to manage, and they've created a whole bureaucracy under it. But if you think about what happens with term limits, it actually radically strengthens that bureaucracy, because now if you're replacing House and senators every two times, for example, there's not a strong institutional memory. They're deeply reliant on those unelected officials. And that makes the administrative state way more powerful to have term limits. Because then you come into office and you don't know what's going on. You just believe what your office manager tells you, and you look to those people because you don't know what else to think. But at least in a system where you can elect someone, there's always a risk that those that should be in power can get kicked out. But I think if we were to do term limits, we'd have to impose them all the way down on government workers through the whole system and just keep the churn going to try and break up the entrenched culture that comes in. But I don't think anyone's even remotely talking about limits on how long someone can work for the government, because it's honestly difficult to find enough replacements for how large our government is. Because it takes, and this isn't to put anyone down, it just takes a certain personality to enjoy the work on the government side consistently in the bureaucracies. And I'm grateful there are some people that do enjoy that work. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad personality or anything, just generally you favor certain things, you enjoy certain things, but that's not the whole world. And if we're replacing those people all the time, there's issues. So anyways, I have concerns, but biggest is, why don't we as a people just vote them out?
So I would, along those lines, those are typically the same people that would say, well, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party just have way too much power.
Yep.
Let me tell you, if we do term limits, those parties are going to become even more powerful.
Yep.
Because if you don't get the blessing of the party, there's no chance at all. You won't have, especially in the state of Utah, our caucus system has been so degraded, it will virtually eliminate it at that point in time. It'll just be, it'll go down to who has the most money to support candidates.
Yeah, and that's, it's, some people would say we're already there with that. And again, I think one reason people go to term limits is because you start to feel helpless. So people that supported my campaign, for example, might feel discouraged and go, Austin only got 3% of the vote. And there's two ways to look at that. One is to look at it and say, oh, we did a lot of work and only got 3% of the vote. But the other way to look at it is to understand that even within that 3%, the people I spoke with and talked to were politically active. So it's very hard to reach those that aren't politically active or that won't come to a political meeting or won't read any information online. Because again, how do you find them unless you knock on their door? You can't knock on 1.8 million doors. And so, but of the politically active, the small core, all of the candidates are interacting with that same group. And so it kind of creates this little echo chamber where even though in the end I had 50,000 votes, I had influence along the way. And you can see the influence that came because as soon as I started saying certain things, I started saying, for example, that the AG should meet with the public. They should have days where the public can go in, air grievances, do different things. And as soon as I started saying that, Derek Brown started saying he would do that too. And then I talked a lot about cleaning up corruption. I'd say law, not politics. This shouldn't be a political office. It should be about enforcing the law. And I talked a lot about that. Michelle Quist, who is a third-party candidate, talked a lot about that. And ultimately, it put Derek Brown in a position where everyone he's talking to is asking him, well, what are you going to do to clean up the office? And he came up with a plan to propose to people to, hopefully keep them with him. Because again, leading up to the election, he doesn't know how many people will or won't vote for me or Michelle Quist. Because the ones he's talking to, a number of them said, yeah, I really like Austin. And he would be open about that. He goes, yeah, you've got some people that really like you. And that, again, then puts pressure on him. And he then, after the election, announced his group of 40 people, people from Democrats, Republicans, independents, from business, from all these different places, the bar, Utah Bar Ethics. 40 people are coming in to evaluate the Utah Attorney General's office and make recommendations from top to bottom of what needs to change. And that happened because I ran, Michelle ran, and there was so much discussion around it. And so did we win the election? No. But did we change the course of things? Absolutely. And even then, another thing that I was fascinated by was I was running independent, saying the office should be independent. And that message got around enough that by the end, the majority of candidates for the AG's office were saying they were independent. If you go to Ballotpedia, you can see this on there. Michelle Quist openly puts, I'm an independent running for Attorney General. She didn't even say United Utah Party on Ballotpedia. I think Ballotpedia put that there, but she just said, I'm an independent. Her statement is, I'm an independent running. And then Rudy Bautista, the Democrat, said, I'm an independent running as a Democrat. And I look at that and I go, again, this is to recognize that, yeah, sure, we didn't reach everyone. I didn't have millions of dollars to do it with. But going from getting on the ballot in February to the election in November and having the few months to try and campaign with very little money and funds, we got 50,000 votes. If you look at something like the Libertarian Party that's been working for decades, they got a few more thousand votes than I did. But they have a seriously long track record. And so to me, again, we can't expect all results immediately. We have to be willing to feed a spirit, help it grow, continue to feed it, work at it until it takes root and grows big enough to do something. But ultimately, we have impact, and our efforts have impact, even if the one of the stated goals, such as winning the election, isn't realized. There's impact along the way. And we can't discount how much that shapes and pushes things. And those voices along the way, I look at it with the Constitution. The anti-federalists championed so hard to not have the Constitution pass. Patrick Henry, who said, give me your liberty or give me death, advocated against adopting the Constitution once it came out. He was so opposed to it because he could see what would happen without rights and things in there. And ultimately, what that produced, even though they didn't win and the Constitution still passed, it forced the Bill of Rights to be put in. And that Bill of Rights has been instrumental in protecting us. And so I look at those things and I go, I don't think God views our efforts on this scale of black and white, like, oh, you lost, nothing happened along the way. I think that God takes our efforts and multiplies them and turns them into something. And I hope everyone that's listening can realize that don't base your faith in an outcome. Base it in putting in the effort, feeding a spirit, and then giving it to God and saying, okay, take it and do with it what's needed. And things happen and things change
So,
as we do that.
what are 3 things that you think you accomplished? What are the 3 key things you think you accomplished?
Well,
From
one
that?
is, I'll be honest, I changed a lot. It was a good growing experience for me. So one thing out there, if you have ever considered running for office, I would say stop asking the question of whether you'll win if you run. Because when I asked that question, if I would win, I think the Spirit was pretty open with me. Probably not your first time. And I didn't ever get this feeling of like, yeah, you'll win. But once I asked the question of, can something good come whether I win or lose? The Spirit was very strong and said, absolutely, something good can come whether you win or lose. And at that point, I realized, oh, I shouldn't be as concerned whether I win or lose. I should just be trying to do something. And so I changed a lot. My heart changed a lot. I grew. And I feel very strongly it's an incredible experience to do. And so I would encourage many people to run for office. But so that piece of it, I do love that I feel my faith grew. I feel my just spirit inside grew. I feel that there was a closer connection to God even from running. Not to say he was directing everything I did, but I could tell that he smiled kindly on the fact that I was trying. And I felt that was an accomplishment. Second, I met a lot of really great people, which is really neat to do too as an accomplishment, because one of the things that meeting people does is you start to see things that the news doesn't say. You start to see how good people are. And it was incredibly refreshing to be with people. It really put a lot of faith back into humanity for me, into our country, because there's so many good people. And so to me, part of the things that I accomplished was expanding my network in a way that allowed me to see more people and more things that were taking place. And it would gain a far deeper appreciation for people and what they're doing. And then third, I really do feel we changed the future of the AG's office. I really think that some things will come from this overhaul. That some things will come from the messaging, and I think we fed the spirit of teaching people about checks and balances, teaching them about personal responsibility, and I think that will grow. And I'm really excited to really work to get us back to a place where we as Americans take responsibility and stop asking the government to solve our problems for us. I'm reminded of a scripture from the Book of Mormon where it talks about a group that repented and they became excited to answer for their own sins. It was after they had a king, King Mosiah, and he said, well, what if we do this judge system where you become responsible? It's no longer up to the king to do everything for you. And in whatever messaging he had for the people, they became excited to answer for their own life, to be responsible for themselves. And they pursued that path. And I believe strongly we can bring that excitement back to America to say, it doesn't work for the government to solve your problems. Take responsibility for yourself. And life's actually far happier when you do that.
Let's take a quick stab at the Corporate Transparency Act. Let's because of the nature of time, I do want to hit. We've got a legislative session coming up. With your experiences running AG, what's on your plate, but the Corporate Transparency Act, in a nutshell, is businesses now need to report on who their close associates are. Or they could receive a very large fine. That's one of the pieces of the Corporate Transparency Act. You've shared with me that you're not for the Corporate Transparency Act. In fact, you are doing you're doing a lawsuit, or what's the proper term?
Yeah, it's a lawsuit against the United States arguing the law is unconstitutional.
So, what are why is the Corporate Transparency Act bad law and bad for us?
Yeah, so at a fundamental level, there's a couple of pieces you have to process with it and kind of connect the dots to see what's really happening. So the federal government has access to all kinds of information about you. Almost all your financial transactions and records they can access through banks and IRS and whatever else. They come out though with the Corporate Transparency Act and they say, hey, we can't find the money launderers yet. We've got people laundering money and not reporting taxes. So we need to know more information to know who the bad guys are. We want to catch them. And so what we're going to mandate is that each business owner file with us the driver's license, the address, the identity of every person that owns 25% or more of their business, which much of that's reported to the IRS currently. But there's a key difference that I'll get to in a minute. And you have to now report the individuals who have the ability to substantially control, either directly or indirectly, your business. And this gets to be extremely difficult to process and say, well, who can indirectly substantially control a business? Is that my wife? If my CEO is sleeping with someone and I don't know, but she's telling him what to do, is she substantially controlling the business indirectly? You start to get to these places of, wow, what does that mean? That's a whole constitutional issue in and of itself, and that the law is, from our perspective, so vague you don't know what it takes to comply because, again, what's indirect substantial control? I don't know. The Constitution requires that laws, especially with criminal penalties attached, have more specificity to them. And this one, you can go to jail for 2 years for not reporting, and you can get fined up to $500 per day for not reporting, or for being late on reporting. So there's that
And
piece.
when do businesses, just for our business owners, when do you need to report and who do you need to report to?
So the
you can
reports are
report to.
due by the end of this year. And these are for small companies. If you have 5 million or less in revenue and less than 20 employees, or sorry, you're exempt if you have 5 million or more in revenue and more than 20 employees. So large corporations don't have to report, but all the small people do.
Interesting how that's the case.
Yeah. And the government is specifically, they openly say this in their briefing to the court. They openly say that Congress found that the small business owners in America are a national security concern.
Of course they are.
And I went, wow, that's just the fundamental premise that we're now a national security concern because we run our own business. And we're the reason they can't track terrorists and money launderers and tax evaders. And I just went, wow, that just alone should give you pause about this. When the federal government classifies you as a national security concern, because you're a law-abiding citizen that didn't tell them everyone you're associated with. So they come in to take this information, and the government has all kinds of mandatory reporting laws. The IRS forces you to report stuff. And so the courts looking at it are kind of going, well, there's been a number of lawsuits filed around the country. They say, well, the government takes information from you all the time. What's the big deal? And say, well, the big deal is that the IRS, if you go to its website and say, how can you use this information? They have extreme limits. They're allowed to use it for tax compliance. Just check in and make sure you did your tax stuff. But they're not allowed to just openly share it with all federal agencies. But under the Corporate Transparency Act, this information, I guess this is a question you asked I didn't answer. It's reported to FinCEN, which is a financial crimes enforcement network. It's like the FBI of financial crimes. It's a department of the Treasury. And you go to fincen.gov/BOI. It's called beneficial ownership information. So fincen.gov/BOI to report. But in the Corporate Transparency Act, FinCEN is specifically allowed to share this information with any federal agency. They're specifically allowed to use it
that
for law
avoids
enforcement.
That avoids the Fourth Amendment.
completely. It's the Fourth Amendment has no application with the Corporate Transparency Act. It's literally just we force you to give us this information and we can use it for whatever we want. Law enforcement, national security, intelligence, these are things that they specifically say in the law can be used. And so you start to think about this, and again, people are starting to get uneasy a little bit, going, wait, what's going on? But there's another level to this, which is not only can FinCEN share it with any federal agency they want to, with no warrant, no judicial oversight, they can share it internationally with other countries. Any country they want to, they can give this
Whoa,
information
whoa, whoa,
to.
whoa, whoa, whoa. So they can share it with any country they choose.
Yeah, as long as it's the law says they have to have a trusted relationship or a treaty.
Boy, that just about includes every single country in the world.
Yeah, maybe Russia right now wouldn't get it. I don't know. Maybe Iran wouldn't get it right now. I don't know. Um, but you start to then look at what's happening and you go, okay, so why is this a concern? Well, I'll just give you some real life examples. So the during the Olympics, Paris Olympics, we're in France, and there's a boxer that comes and punches a woman. And this boxer, the woman drops out immediately. He's like, well, I've never been hit so hard. And suddenly people go, oh, look at the history. This boxer failed the gender test 2 years ago at this boxing match, whatever, must be a male. And there's this huge firestorm about this male boxer. Now, after the fact, it appears that the reason they failed was for testosterone levels, but not because of actual gender reassignment surgeries or anything. I don't know that we have, I don't know. I haven't looked at it enough to know if it's conclusive or not either way. But the way it shook out in the media was that this boxer was labeled as transgender, but wasn't actually. But during the time of the whole focus on it and people kind of sorting through things, President Trump tweeted about it, J.K. Rowling tweeted about it, Elon Musk tweeted about it, saying, why do we have boys punching girls, different things. Under French law, that's illegal. And so this boxer files a complaint, criminal complaint with the prosecutor in France. And the prosecutor in France says, yeah, I'm going to open an investigation. I'm going to prosecute everyone who tweeted something. And I'm going to use all international tools at my disposal to bring them to justice. Well, you start to think about it. What if you were part of a company or you were associated with someone that's reporting you for beneficial ownership purposes to the federal government that says, oh, Austin and John are closely associated. And then the government goes, oh, Austin said this. Well, under French law, could all the business owners be liable? I don't know. Maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. But you can suddenly have a situation where you fly to Europe, any state in the EU, and suddenly get picked up with an arrest warrant if your business or anyone you're associated to broke the law, and they're coming after you, and you have no idea. And we saw this play out with Elon Musk.
And they have access to your financial records.
Well, so to be clear, the Corporate Transparency Act isn't for financial records, it's for associations. So they're sharing associations. But again, this is where if someone you're associated with does something, and now you might get in trouble for it or get looked at by the government, there's an issue. So Brazil has some anti-freedom of speech laws. They told Twitter to pull down some stuff that were supporting a campaign there. Twitter refuses to. They don't have assets or offices in Brazil. They don't really care. And so the Brazilian Supreme Court gets crazy angry at him, orders him to hire someone in this country that can take information down that they can put in jail if they don't or whatever. And Twitter just thumbs its nose at him and moves on. So what happens is the Brazilian government Supreme Court froze Starlink's assets as a related company because Starlink had internet broadcasting into Brazil, and so it's not even a sister company. It has one common, and not just one, but a main common ownership of Elon Musk, and Starlink gets punished. And I look at this and I go, yeah, this is starting to get pretty crazy. And if you think about it here, well, if the federal government can look at everyone associated with somebody, and you now are associated with someone who's actively campaigning for or against President Trump, do you feel safe in that association? If the federal government, if anyone in the federal government can check it out and see, well, who supported him, who didn't, who were the people that he's associated with. And when the government can come and pry on your associations to that level, it creates intense fear, and it will lead to the place where we stop associating. The way that communism and tyranny take over is to make us afraid of everyone and everything, to make us fear our neighbor.
Okay, now someone's gonna. I can hear the liberals out there chirping away. Oh, come on, John, that's ridiculous. Well, AOC has talked about re-education, re-educating individuals that voted for Trump, and so did Hillary Clinton.
Well, I'm not even talking about re-education. I'm just talking about
But what I'm
pure
saying,
retribution.
well, my point is if they get that information, they can go with retribution and take retribution out on people that are close to you.
Yep.
That's what I'm getting. So to keep people from doing even business with, oh my
Bunch of
gosh,
crazies.
John talk with John talks a little too much, or
Yep.
Austin Hepworth talks a little too much about conservative policies. Boy, I better not do any business with them because
Yep. Because if I get reported, then look at the track record. Everyone Austin's worked with has been audited, or they've all had the FBI knock on their door. And these are things that aren't that crazy far-fetched because we're imposing liability more and more on associates of someone who committed a crime. So you look at what's happening with the school shootings. They've come out now. There's been two different situations where parents have been arrested and put in jail because their kids did a school shooting. That precedent to say that you are now vicariously liable for what someone else did. And, people argue like, no, it's because the parent gave him a gun or they didn't bring him home or whatever. But it's very much to send the message very strongly and create the precedent that we're creating vicarious liability for people's actions. And it's increasing. In the business world, there's a ton of vicarious liability where you can get in trouble for what someone else does. And they do that to force you to have crazy systems and oversights and whatever, trying not to be liable for different things that go wrong. But in a world of vicarious liability, where you can get in trouble for someone else's actions, you're going to think twice if it's being openly reported who the close associates are. You're not going to associate with them closely. And here in the United States, the IRS openly targeted conservative groups, conservative nonprofits. That's something you can just Google that. There's quite a bit of information about that. The IRS admitted to it eventually. And this is information you go, okay, so if any government agency has this, if they're upset at something Trump did, they can target every Trump supporter and their associates with this type of information. And even the Supreme Court in past cases, they have quite a bit of precedent that says, yeah, if the government has this information, they say the quote is something like, power is a heady thing. And they said it gets to people and they need a check and balance. And if you just hand them this information, the government will abuse it. Those cases are from the 1940s and 50s and 60s. But this court even then realized when there's power and there's information together, there needs to be a serious check and balance. And that's the Fourth Amendment, which says you don't get this information without a warrant. But this eviscerates the warrant requirement. It eviscerates the probable cause requirement. It's just purely, well, we want it. We think it will help catch a few criminals. So we're going to take it from every law-abiding citizen. We're going to turn you into a criminal if you don't report. And we're going to know everyone you're associated with. And we can share it across the whole federal government, every agency. We can share it with international companies or international countries. And they can share it with banks and others too. For whatever reason, they can disclose it to financial institutions, which is,
ESG
again,
type stuff.
yeah, so you get to you get to the central currency, all these things about, they want to know who you associate with to shut you out of the system. That's what some people would go to look at. But to me, when you look at it and you look at a number of the concerns and checks and balances, it blows those all apart. And it's very strongly, I believe, meant to be part of this system to say, if we know all associates, we can get people to stop associating with those that talk or say or speak or do differently, because we can make it untenable for them.
So, what are the 3 key things that my audience should do to take action on this?
Well, there's a couple things. One, Mike Lee was our only representative that voted against it. But I would openly say, write Mike Lee, his office, and say, hey, we have a pure Republican, not pure, we have a Republican majority control, whatever. Let's repeal this thing. One, I think we should be actively reaching out to say, let's repeal it. And again, it might be hard, but Trump did veto it. Mike Lee voted against it, but it passed over Trump's veto the first time he was in office. And then second, I think you should openly pray and ask that God touch the hearts of the judges hearing these cases. Our hearing's December 19th, which is, pushing it right up against the gun. But we're still hoping that there can be a resolution. But the third is to support groups who are working to bring these lawsuits. And there are many groups that have joined together. It's expensive to do. It takes a lot of sacrifice for these groups to be the ones in the case, paying for attorneys and things. And you can make contributions or join them or do different things to help support them so that it's not this lonely battle for them. But the plaintiffs we have here in Utah that are filing, it's part of the People Restored. You can look them up. There's the Ranchers Cattlemen Action Fund or something. They call themselves RCAF, I think. Great group of ranchers and things that have joined together. There's Crofter Market that's part of that. And again, these are ones that they're sacrificing. They're trying to make it happen because they recognize the seriousness of it. So I'd say absolutely support them in supporting this lawsuit. Either join or donate. Or, Crofter Market, you can buy food from its app or whatever. All those things can help support things like this.
Then let's hit, we've got about 15 minutes left. Probably need to take about 13 of that because we'll do a 2-minute wrap up. What do we need to watch? What are you hearing that's coming up on the Hill in January? What things do we need to watch for? And what do you see as best practice to interact with your reps?
Yeah, so at least I don't have full knowledge of everything that's coming. There's always surprises that just hit and whatever. I have some access up there, but I certainly don't have, access to majority or anything like that. And so the pieces the news is talking about that the Speaker of the House has said, we're going to have a lot of election integrity focus. I think that comes as a direct result of Phil Lyman. Again, he didn't win, but create enough noise around election integrity that it's a high priority, at least for the House. Some of the House reps I've talked to have said, the House will pass a bunch of them, but the Senate won't. And the Senate's where the bigger battle is. They're a little more resistant to it. I don't know. Personally, I'm just passing on that information that I heard. But I think that in this election integrity realm, there's a lot of opportunity to mess with things. You can improve things, but you can also make it worse. And there are groups that want to change our primary system, that want to get rid of caucuses, that want to do quite a few things. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some very strong bills to also attack some of the foundations of elections as well, since it will be a topic. So I think people need to be very willing to just kind of jump in and reach out to the reps, talk to them, make sure they know where the reps are at, make sure they know their concerns. You can get on le.utah.gov. That's the legislative website that has bills. And as election bills pop up, you can click on them and just say, I want to track this. And it will email you if there's any changes in status on the bill. You can attend hearings. And to your question about how to interact with representatives, yelling at them, threatening them, it really doesn't work. And I'm not saying you have to, just suck up to them either necessarily. Just treat them like a human, treat them respectfully, share with them openly, listen to what they say, be willing to debate things, go through things, but keep a level head about it. They have respect for people that can be passionate about something, can argue for something, but that doesn't get to be a complete jerk or something. Most of the reps are trying to do the right thing. And just because they disagree with you doesn't mean that they've been bought off or that they're evil or something like that. And people that make those accusations, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not persuasive. So I don't think it helps. I think it's important to realize you need points, you need evidence, you need arguments. And if one doesn't listen to you, that's fine. If they don't agree with you, that's fine. Move on to the others. Work with other groups as well. So the election side is one to watch, but another big one that I think is going to be an ongoing battle for a few years is actually homeschooling. And we had the Gavin Potter situation here in Utah where he was abused to the point that he died. So super sad situation. But again, people in wanting to stop all harm are saying, well, we got to make sure there's no more Gavin Potter situations and we need to change things. And there's been a push across the nation for something called the Make
When did
Homeschool
that
Safe
happen?
Act.
When did that happen?
Gavin Potter was, I think it was earlier this year.
Okay.
I could be wrong. It could have been last year, but I think it was earlier this year. But anytime that there's a homeschool abuse situation, again, this is one of the red flags. You can kind of know what the powers that be are pushing if it appears in the national news. And any homeschool abuse situation is appearing in national news right now, which to me says there's a red flag. There's an agenda behind this. Not that anything in the national news has an agenda behind it, just that an isolated incident in Utah or Virginia or whatever is suddenly in the national news. That's a red flag. But the Make Homeschool Safe Act wants to make it so that the government knows everything going on with homeschoolers. And again, this then gets into some very sacred and private rights of the home, the family, different things. Reporting to the government, there's all different types of ways this could shake out. And we don't have, we're not certain yet of a bill or not on it, but we know there's been quite a bit of discussion, and a number of reps have confirmed that they want to make sure the Gavin Potter situation doesn't happen again, which to me says there's going to be homeschool regulations. And in addition, another thing that fuels homeschool regulations right now are that the government passed the Utah Fits All Scholarship, where they're giving money to homeschoolers. They're doing it without audit, without checking into where it's going. And that, to me, I said it from the beginning. I said, if you do this, it will lead to intense regulation of homeschoolers because they'll just wait for someone to abuse it. And then they'll say, see, we can't trust them. We got to regulate them, all these things. And even before the abusive situations have been made public, there's already a bunch of reps saying openly, this is crazy. We can't be doing this. We've got to be regulating, auditing, doing all these things. And so there are people working to expand the Utah Fits All Scholarship, and there's people working to increase the regulation of it. And usually when you have those two types of influences coming together, one saying, oh, I want to expand it, and one saying, I want to regulate it, sometimes they kind of marry together.
Coalesce.
And because they go, okay, if you agree to my thing, I'll agree to your thing type thing. But the concern is, just to share a little with homeschooling, and this to bring it back to the Corporate Transparency Act even, I view entrepreneurs and homeschoolers as kind of one of the stalwart bastions of liberty, where they're just like,
Yes.
yeah, we don't need the government, we're going to do it, type thing. This isn't to put down anyone that's not an entrepreneur or homeschooler. It's just to say that group tends to be very liberty-minded. You can find liberty-minded people elsewhere too. But if you're the government and you want to know where those people are at, you'll find them in the homeschooler groups and the entrepreneur groups. So the government comes in with the Corporate Transparency Act and says, we want to know all your associates in the entrepreneur group. And then here in Utah, this is a sad thing to me, a little bit scary to see how these powers work together. So a bill comes up and it says, hey, homeschoolers, we've learned that when you want to do a co-op together or a micro school together, you're running into issues with zoning ordinances. Zoning will say no schools here, so they don't let your co-op come to this building or whatever. And so the Utah bill said, we want to make it so that the law says a homeschool group is allowed in any zoning anywhere. There's no zoning that can ban a homeschool group. And so a lot of homeschoolers say, yay, we're getting some protection. This is a good thing. But then the law says, and again, you read this in conjunction with the Corporate Transparency Act, which is coming into effect, the two at the same time. The law says, but to qualify as a homeschool group that has protection so that they can't ban you from meeting anywhere in the state.
Let me guess, they have to register.
They have to register as an entity. Yep. And disclose all the people who have control of that homeschool group. Now, Utah doesn't say you have to disclose, but they say to get the protection, you have to register as an entity. And then the federal government says, so now tell us everyone that you're associated with in homeschooling. And I go, that's not a coincidence. Those two things are not coincidences, that you get protection by registering. That's not a thought that crosses people's minds. That comes from somewhere. And so I look at bills like this, I look at things like this, and I go, as a people, we need to take responsibility to be involved. There's a lot of really good groups that put out information, that talk about stuff, that alert you to bills. Sign up for their newsletters. Take time to read them. Watch a little less TV during the session. Do something to be responsible. Reach out to your reps. Many reps don't get people reaching out to them.
Going up and seeing your reps makes a difference. And then you can also, so both of my reps know my name, know my phone number, and when I call, they typically return my calls. One of them, I am a lot less favorable on what they do than the other. But when I go up, both of them give me lip service, and even one of them actually gave me some detail on why some things were going south and why he was wanting some things fought. And that allows me to go back to the other rep to say, hey, what's going on with this? When you go up and you visit your reps, they know that you're willing to put effort in. And for some reason, they like being voted back in on a regular basis.
Yeah, it is. It is something that it's always in the back of their mind. It is. And so we have influence, even if our rep votes against us. I remember sales tax on service. Utah held a special session on it in December. And I went up and sat next to my rep. I literally just went up and I said, I'm going to sit next to you on the floor here. But you don't get to make that decision yourself. He was nice and let me sit there. But I still said, I want to be here. I said, you're not going to vote for this. And he said, Austin, I have to. They're all telling me I have to vote for it. And I said, I'm going to sit next to you. And you're going to press the no button when it comes up to vote. And he goes, Austin, it's going to win anyways. And I said, exactly. So just vote no, do the right thing. Anyways, I sat there with my rep. And he was under intense pressure to say yes. I was putting intense pressure on him, sitting next to him in person, to say no. He finally said no. And he pressed the no button. And then he kind of shakes his head and he's like, I'm going to be in so much trouble for this. But then Utah did the referendum. They got it sent to the ballot. And then the legislature repealed it because of that referendum. But my rep, was the first to say, I didn't vote for it. And again, I look at these things and I think we cannot place our stock in a moment in time or the outcome of a election or a vote. We have to think bigger and continue on that path and just be willing to insert ourselves into it. I've inserted myself into many things that I've lost, but then you see them come around years later. That happens. Or even with people, business, clients, all kinds of things. You say something, they don't go with it, but 5 years later they come around, and it's okay to have faith. It's okay to work. And it's just one of the gifts we have and the opportunities we have. So I'd encourage people to believe, ultimately, work on things, but be aware. There will be some concerning things that come out that can have some deep impact on our society. And we need to be digesting some of these, going to the source, but also we can rely on some groups to an extent to help us to, pinpoint or to point out if there are issues. So sign up for some newsletters, different things like that.
So, speaking of newsletters, I'm assuming Believe puts newsletters out.
I will be honest, with the election or the campaign, I got bad at newsletters. I need to get back in on that. But yes, I'm going to get back in that saddle and start doing newsletters again.
So,
At some
how
point.
can people support you, your organization, and learn a little bit more about Austin Hepworth?
Yeah, so you can go to austinhepworth.com. You can sign up there if you want to put in your email for newsletters, or at believe.legal. You can sign up there as well. And then, yeah, if you want to support, legal work referrals are always helpful. If you need a will or trust done, anything like that, we can do those as well. Constitutional cases, different things. But ultimately, there's groups like Eagle Forum. There's groups like Your Health Freedom. Even things like whether or not you agree with all the groups, sign up for the newsletters, because they'll alert you to bills. And even groups you're opposed to, sign up for the newsletter, because if they come out and say, oh, they're running this bill, it might be a bill you like, and you can then
You
tell
to
your reps you support it. So don't be afraid to sign up for a newsletter of someone you disagree with, because it gives you a lot of valuable information, honestly. And just process information, take that time.
Well, Austin, I want to say thanks for coming on tonight. I really appreciate you joining us here. I appreciate your run for office. I appreciate you being willing to do the constitutional support that you are going after the Affordable Care Act. Uh, Man, I pray for your success on that, and just thank you for being just a good man out there that's trying to make good things happen. Folks, not everyone has all the capacity that Austin Hepworth does, but you have the capacity to call your elected officials, go up there and visit them, let them know that where you live and why you're there. And the vast majority of the time, they're going to see you. And if they don't, then you can tell your neighbors they wanted nothing to do with me, and that hurts too. So, thanks for joining me today, Austin. Last thought that you want to leave with the audience.
The last thought is just that, again, I think don't put on your shoulders the outcome of everything, because we talk a lot about America being a land of liberty, but it's also God's country. And I think that we need to really remember that this is God's country. And if we do our part, we can stand still with assurance, in a sense, not stand still as in do nothing, but be still in our hearts, at peace, knowing that God will do his part. And I believe very strongly that America is God's country, and there's some great things still to come. And so I continue to work because I believe God's part of this, and we'll continue to keep America the country it is if we do our part.
Great message. Thank you, my friend. God bless.
Yeah,
And
thank you, John.
folks, this has been Talk with John. We're grateful for you joining us today, and we'll catch you next week.